Shalom Shalom, and welcome with the continuation of this series that we have entitled The Rebbe, the Messiah, and the Orthodox Indifference, obviously based upon the book of Rabbi David Berger, who wrote a fascinating book at the catapult of when all of this was taking place. Now, there was a lot of aborted initiatives and sustained attack that they received as a result of their response to this big problem that was taking place. And that you'll be able to read it in his book in chapter 3, how they took this to a higher level and they addressed even members of the RCA, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, the Yeshivat Har Sion, and many, many others, which eventually was declared something that was not acceptable. Now, interesting enough, Rabbi Lichtenstein, who the Rabbi Berger had admired, recommended certain statements, and one of the statements that Rabbi Lichtenstein referred in order to try to keep peace with the Hasidic movement was to utilize the following statement as a failed Messiah versus a false Messiah. And I'm going to read you what it says here because it's very important to understand the terms between failed Messiah and false Messiah. And I'm going to read Rabbi Berger's statement here. And I admire the Rebbe enormously, says Rabbi Lichtenstein. The steps I'm recommending are not only consistent with such admiration, they may well be necessary to prevent his going down into history as a false Messiah. In the article, I used the more appropriate phrase, failed Messiah, but in the real world, such subtle distinctions will surely be lost. Now, Berger makes a note in his book that the term failed Messiah is borrowed from a highly controversial article that was presented by Irving Greenberg, and this was used for a figure who is mistaken about his messianic status, but puts forth a message reflecting the right values. In other words, false Messiah should be very, very restricted in this regards. And he says so, and so he figures that whose teachings were intrinsically harmful. The relationship of Judaism and Christianity towards a new organic model you should see in Eugene Fisher's book. A false Messiah is one who fails. And this is something that Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi from Columbia had put in an oral presentation according to Rabbi Berger. Now, before we even go into this, one of the things that Rabbi Weisberg stated is the fact that there are sources that would indicate a level of legitimacy for the belief or of the belief in a Messiah who comes from the dead. Now, let me say this again. He has certain references that would say, and these are all opinions. Whenever we deal with opinions, they're not halakhic decisions. So these are just opinions. And this is the big problem when we deal with this issue of what actually is the expected Messiah to do. Because we deal with midrashim and agadatas, like we find in Talmud Sanhedrin 98b, which quotes that the Rav said the following: if the Messiah is of the living, he is like our holy Rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. If he's from the dead, he is like Daniel, which I make reference to Daniel. Commentary usually is ascribed to Rashi, which lived in the year about 1040 to 1100, and provides two explanations. If the Messiah will be from the living, then he will be in fact Rabbi Yehuda, who is marked by both suffering and absolute piety. If he's from the dead, it will be the biblical Daniel, who combined the same two traits. The word like in the Talmudic statement must be elided. If a model of Messiah can be found among the living, it would be Rabbi Yehuda. If from the dead, it would be Daniel. This remark in the article that only the vanishing tiny number of Jews may have left open the possibility that Daniel would be the Messiah is unsupported by even a scintilla of evidence, says Rabbi David Berger. Rabbi Isaac Abarbanel in the late 15th century, in his work Yeshuot Meshicho, also indicated the belief in a resurrected Messiah is acceptable, and when he cites the Talmudic passage as evidence that one should not be surprised with such a rabbinic opinion. Go back again. Such a rabbinic opinion. Moreover, the Yerushalmi Talmud in Berachot 2:4 says, if the Messianic king is from the living, his name is David. And if from the dead, his name is David, though some may take this to mean the spark of King David, King David's soul will be the Messiah. Other refers to David himself. Finally, the article's assertions that the sources are inapplicable and irrelevant is further undetermined by the passage that may indeed not refer to the Messiah's death and resurrection, but predicts his bodily ascent to heaven or his appearance, disappearance, and reappearance. We talked about that because this is found in chapter 12 of Daniel, which makes reference and inference to the possibility of an appearance or disappearance and reappearance. And I made so many commentaries on this passage because it's very clear that this does not speak about a second coming. It refers that while the person here is here on earth, he appears, he disappears, and then reappears. I would even argue to say that that's exactly the same notion that the early Christians who followed Jesus and his teaching held to. He survived the resurrection. He appeared to the disciples, and then he disappeared in the clouds, supposedly. And that's also, there's a lot of, if you take it literally, it would sound like he's flying up to heaven. But then he told his followers to teach his gospel, his wellsprings, as you were, and spread it throughout the whole entire world of that time. And then when that would happen, he would come back and then assume, as it were, the throne. Because they had asked him, will you restore Israel at this time? He says, no, not yet. I don't know when, but you know what? Your job is to go and teach everybody. Very similar to what the Baal Shem Tov said also when he met supposedly Elijah in some type of vision or message. Now keep in mind, this is all during the period of time where prophecy or Nevuah is no longer existence. So when we look into all of these stories, a person would be completely an imbecile to believe all the stories that was told about the Baal Shem Tov. I don't say that. There's a Nagada that says that about the Baal Shem Tov is true. But a person who does not believe it is considered as if he was a heretic, a crazy man. So we have a situation here that it's in between Bubba Meisters and stories and a whole bunch of creative ideas that you're to believe or we're to believe, and then at the same time we're to accept certain explanations of what was happening. I have a very clear understanding as what I have read regarding the Baal Shem Tov story and the similarities between his message to go out and teach the whole entire nation about his teachings of Chassidut, or the wellsprings, which is a very, very interesting word because it's nothing new. That same expression you'll find in the Christian teachings, where that if you were to believe that a wellspring will come out from the depth of your being, this, my friend, is nothing new. But there is something that connects one with the other. And this is something that if you are not aware of, you begin to say, oh, Chassidut is completely an innovative thing. As a matter of fact, one of the connections that we find is this concept of the Tzaddik, completely changed at the arrival of the Hasidim, or of the Hasidic movement, and the emergence of the Hasidic movement in the early centuries, because prior to, a tzaddik was understood to be a person of well-learned knowledge, a person who was delved into Torah learning, and was a righteous man in all of his acts. That doesn't mean that he was beyond fallibility. He was fallible. He could make mistakes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech she'akol nihya v'ro. The Tzaddik was all of a sudden changed after that. And it's interesting because one of the historians and commentators about the Hasidic movement, which is a gentleman named Shalom, very well known in all the materials, he brings this about that the opinions, particularly about the concept of a Tzaddik, drastically became a whole entire idea. Now I'm going to argue to a certain extent that it really wasn't really entirely brand new idea, because this idea was already in existence during the time of the Christian movement and the first messianic movement of the first century that really took a very close parallel to what you now see in Chabad. And I'm going to say this as a tale is told of a famous saint mentioned here, that he did not go to the Maggid of Mezrich to learn Torah from him, but to watch him tie his bootlace. This new idea of religious leaders, the Tzaddik, differs completely from the traditional idea of rabbinical Judaism. The Talmid Chacham, or the student of Torah, mainly in that he himself has become Torah, is no longer his knowledge but his life, which lends a religious value to the personality. He is the living incarnation of Torah. And let me parallel this, because I'm going to use on purpose many passages in the Christian Bible so you see the parallels between the Chassidic thought and the MAAMRIM NOTSRIM, the belief of the NOTSRIMs of the early first century. And that was basically that they believed that a person was the actual tree of life, the incarnation of the tree of life. And this is one of the things that Jesus says, if you believe in me, he says, you say you believe that you have taken hold of the tree of life. Believe in me, for I am the tree of life. And many similar statements like that, that parallels between Jesus and the Hasidic thought, is so incredibly amazing that any person that has a little bit of learning in both materials will come to understand the same thing that Rabbi Berger had come to arrive. And this has to do primarily with the concept of the idea of the Tzaddik. And you'll read that in Gershom Sholom's book, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. And like a friend of mine also mentioned many times in his videos, the biggest problem, what changed Judaism, that what we have today, really was the introduction of the mystic elements of Judaism. It has distorted and changed completely what Judaism was. Now we live in a similarity to what you can say is early century Christianity, with such movements as Hasidic thought. That's why so many people are driving away from Christianity and moving into closer to the concept of the Hasidic communities. This is why you see a lot of people converting from the Christian faith into more easily into groups that are Hasidic. And I'm not only speaking about Chabad. I mean, you have also the Breslov. And keep in mind, all these movements are wonderful. The people are wonderful and beautiful. But the idea of a Tzaddik was transformed by Hasidim to signify a superior form of humanity, a being who's close to God and somewhat inseparable from Him. In Hasidism, the Tzaddik soul is generally perceived to have emerged from the most sublime source within the Godhead, the divinity. This is one of the concepts that is expressed. As Hasidim evolve this notion of a Tzaddik, will also change, it is generally agreed upon among Hasidim that a Tzaddik possesses certain qualities. He is often said to possess a common soul with his followers, and in fact with all Jews. And this you will find in Avram Posner's book Al Chassadikim, which became the main origin, the main basis of a lot of the bases of Chabad Hasidim. Which means that you could even pray to a Tzaddik. Which means, and we're going to look at that, they can even bow down to a Tzaddik. You can talk to a Tzaddik. You can adore the Tzaddik. You could do things that normally it's incomprehensible. And all of this, they bring sources down in order to be able to justify what from prior Hasidic movement would be considered outright idolatry. And as far as I'm concerned, it is menut. As far as many others are concerned, even Ovadia Yosef, it's considered menut, heresy. Now, why would any Sephardic leader all of a sudden want to join something that is clearly known to be usher? There are so many Sephardic rabbis who have joined the line of Hasidic and Chabadic philosophy because they were educated and went to yeshivas of Hasidic yeshivas, and thus they went with the flow and did not go against the customs to a certain extent, but eventually ended up changing their customs. And that's going to be another video that we're going to deal with. How Chabad in particular has usurped and have taken over the Sephardic reigns of a lot of communities. Now, he is often considered in Hasidic thought, the Tzaddik, to be the Moses of his generation, the prophet, the leader of the Jewish people. And this we have many different typologies on that, and based on the Parsha Korach in particular. Now, when we look at this as a pillar of which the world stands, the Tzaddik is considered the very foundation of the world. This is based on Talmud Bavli and Hagigah 12b. But keep in mind, by changing the concept of a tzaddik, they also changed what it actually referred to. From one who was a student of Torah and learned in Torah to one who is now, as it were, one with God. That's why I put a particular passage from the Christian Bible when Jesus came out and told the leaders of the temple, I and the Father are one. And they were about to pick up stones to stone him. And he asked them, why are you stoning me? Why are you going to kill me here? For the blasphemy that you said that you are one with God, that you basically you're God, you're one with God, you're completely one with God. And then he brings out a passage in Psalms that has to do that God stands up in the congregation of God, and that those who are involved in Torah basically are the embodiment of the divinity inside, and therefore they represent divinity. But if you read further, it makes a very clear reference that there's a big distinction between the human being and the Creator. And even in Numbers, it says very clearly, God is not a man that he should lie. Which means that even as a mortal man, there is the capability in the prior tzaddik concept that even a tzaddik could be able to sin. Let me say it again, that even a tzaddik can be able to sin. In the Chassidic idea, it comes much, much closer to the Christian concept that a tzaddik, or a holy man, like in the case of Jesus, he never sinned. He never committed any mistakes. He never made any mistakes. You propose this to any Chabad rabbi, that it's very possible that the Lubavitcher Rebbe committed a sin or did something that on his level was wrong, you would be speaking blasphemy. Because the concept comes and derives from this point of Hasidic changing of the idea of a tzaddik. He is the source of holiness. He is the foundation of the world. He stands between heaven and earth like an intermediary. And then you can look in Samuel Dresner's book, The Tzaddik. The tzaddik goes beyond that. It even goes further than that. And here is where we find that he is chosen one who has refused nothing in heaven or on earth. In other words, he becomes, as it were, the spiritual connector between him and God. Haven't I heard that somewhere? Yes, my friends. You will hear that many times in MAAMRIM NOTSRIM, in the teachings of the NOTSRIMs. That basically Jesus is the intermediator, the intercessor, the go-between humanity and God. My friend, this is exactly the same teachings that the Hasidic thought brings about. There's not really a concept that you can go directly to God. You need a go-between. You need a connector. You need, as it were, a car to take you there. And this concept is one that has created so much problems in Jewish history that today all of the failed messiahs and all of the false messiahs have deriven from these teachings. All of them. Look it up in history. Even when Shabbatai Tzvi came arose, the Cardoza brothers had to fight and argued over this point. One of the Cardoza brothers said that basically Shabbatai Tzvi was the go-between. His other brother said no. Divided families. It broke up families. Interesting enough, this is exactly what Jesus said too. I have come not to bring peace, but a sword between mother and father, sister and brother. My friends, this teaching that we're talking about destroys family, destroys home. Hasidic concepts comes to divide in between the marriages to the one that is supposedly following the line of Hasidic thought and those that are not. But people don't want to realize it because it's so nice. It's so beautiful. It's so wow. And yet, we find that according to Hasidim, the Tzaddik has forged a spiritual identity so strong that in some Hasidic literature, it almost deifies him, comparing the Tzaddik to God. Well, if you go in Israel, you will see that the Elokists, those who believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is in fact God, they pray to him and they say, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kelonenu, and they make reference that this speaks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Not so far long, this is this exact same thing they said about Jesus. Now, stating that God dwells in the body and the soul of a tzaddik, and the tzaddik incorporates this God into an inseparable union with himself, and this you see Rabbi Dover Mezrich speaks about that in Likutei Amarim, David de Ravav de Yaakov, that the will of God and the will of the tzaddik are one. Where did I hear that again? Let's see, that was John chapter 10, I believe. It says, I and the Father are one. Which works do you want to stone me for? You have seen the works that I've done of my Father? My friends, MAAMRIM, NOTSRIM, and Chassidut in essence are echad. Anyone who embraces the Chassidic concepts are embracing Christianity of first century. I have no doubt of that. And this is why I realized that in fact it's the same teaching disguised in a different dress, in a different modern dress. But it doesn't end there, because we continue to read something even further, that the tzaddik, according to most, will also basically become immaterial. In other words, they basically become omnipresent once they leave this world. They can be everywhere. They can be like almost like they can be like Jesus. They can pray to him anywhere you want. You can send letters to the kever or send letters to 770. He will answer. And you wonder why people begin to get so involved in this mysticism. It appears as if idolatry has become an acceptable form of worship to one God. Let me say it again. That strange worship which our sages had rejected has now become an acceptable form of service to God because it's growing. Because it's the largest segment in the Jewish population that is growing. In other words, as I argued from all of my videos prior, my friend, MAAMRIM NOTSRIM is the leprosy that has invaded the Jewish world to such an extent that's already within the ranks of Orthodoxy. And those who know this are completely indifferent to it. And they're not going to do anything. Why? In one of my future videos, I'm going to discuss how the power of the MAAMRIM NOTSRIM has become that is now affected even the levels of kashrut in the Jewish world. The majority of kosher symbols today are influenced, manipulated, or controlled by Hasidic or Chabadnik rabbis and leaders, which brings about a whole another problem which we will discuss and see in the future. The whole life of a Rebbe figure is the deification and those who follow him. The Rebbe has fully invested himself into the community, and he shares the soul of the community's member, and he cannot be separated from them. In other words, he is one with his community. He is one with his Chassidim. another expression you'll find very similar in the book of John, when Jesus compares that he and his followers are one. If you love one another. Achdut. Achdut in the name of Avodah Zarah. Incredible, huh? Fascinating concept. Now, interesting enough, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Aberdevich, he describes how Yaakov, and he uses this passage to describe how Yaakov was called God because he was pure. From this, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Aberdevich derives that one may bow to a tzaddik by virtue of his purity and obedience to God. He further notes that to bow to an angel for its own sake is heresy, whereas to bow down to him as a messenger of God is permissible. My friends, we have plenty of passages given to justify the worship of a man as God when God says not to. And thus, the Hasidic world, in particular, the concept of a tzaddik, now changes the whole entire meaning of how to connect directly to God. You don't. You don't connect directly to God. You directly connect with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the emissary, the tzaddik of the generation. The Rebbe-Chassid relationship is one of an obstruction where the Chassid negates his will to the will of his master. The Rebbe or the Jesus or the teacher or the master. Such nullification makes the leader an infallible leader. He can do no wrong. My friend, this is the most dangerous thing that the Jewish community is playing with. We have seen what happens when we have leaders who basically have followers who does not question one iota of their decrees. We have seen whole communities completely commit suicide because the leader says do so. My friend, this is a cult. The sages from the past declared it such, and declared it menut. It has become the club. It has become the in crowd. And if you're not wearing a black hat, if you're not wearing a black kapata, if you're not being the Hasidic guy, you're not part of the group. You're ostracized. And God forbid, you're the one that's causing division. You're the one that's causing problems. You're the one that's basically leaving the fold. Not that they left the fold. Not that they left what the rabbis taught prior. You are. Because you're trying to follow what was in place prior to this change of Hasidic thought influencing and proselytizing the Jewish world with their idea. And I said it very correctly. Proselytizing. They have become no different than Christianity going to Israel and proselytizing Jews for Jesus. These are Jews for Schneersianity. And there's also Jews who are for Nachman. And there are Jews for other Rebbes. Whenever you have any Hasidic movement that pushes people to follow one leader in such a way that completely negates everything, that your will basically is meaningless, you have no sense of your own will, you are dealing with a cult, my friend. And I can't put my intellectual cap away just so I could believe, brother. The Rebbe-Hasid financial relationship is one that they're dependent on the followers. And this is something that you will see in every single institution. And one of the things that you'll see is the idea of a contribution to the Rebbe. Now obviously Chabad has surpassed the typical traditional Rebbe Chassid or the Rebbe disciple follower concept. But the famous idea of basically nullifying your whole entire existence for the sake of a man that can still commit a mistake, albeit very carefully, is something very hard to live with. And thus, a Rebbe has to be very, very wealthy. According to Talmud in Nedarim, at the Talmud Bavli, in Nedarim, the Holy One does not permit his presence to rest except upon one who is strong, wealthy, wise, and humble, and are derived from Moshe. You can also see Joseph Caro in Kesef Mishnah and Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, although there's some passage that says that's not required, which means that in order for a Rebbe to function, he has to be very financially powerful. A Rebbe cannot be challenged, because the moment one does this, one ceases to be a chassid. My friend, I ceased to be a chassid. This is aptly expressed in the Yiddish Chassidic adage, "Vergmendigt kleiner Kasche." Don't question the tzaddik. The attitude is almost opposite of one's relationship with the community rabbi. He is often criticized. He is often expected to prove himself, particularly on a halakhic and scholarly level. This describes Hasidim try to conceal the apparent lies that were told by Yosef Yitzhak in relations to his book. They quoted biblical sources to justify his lies. My friends, it becomes very similar to the problems that now faces the Catholic Church. All of the dirt is swept under the rug. You don't launder your dirty clothes in public. You don't tell about the ugliness of how the movement is corrupt from within and does harm to people from within and from without. And this is why we continue to see failed messiahs, because in reality we are desperate. In reality, we're looking for anyone that has somewhat of a possibility. Granted, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a great man in and of his own merit, but he was a human being. And when they make him more than that, they've removed the true qualities of a leader. Remember speaking with Dr. Grossman, or Dr. Gross, who attended the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I had the opportunity to speak to him here in Hollywood, and had a long conversation, and how he was so impressed by his demeanor as almost like a grandfather figure. And I asked him a couple of questions. He told me the Lubavitcher Rebbe went into a state of immense depression. That even, according to what he told me, had to give him medications to deal with some of it. Of course, one of the things he also told me is that he asked he asked him not to allow the Hasidim know what he was going through. He had suffered the loss of his wife, Chayamushka, and he was in deep depression. And this doctor explained to me that he had complete direct entrance, and that many times he had conversation with him because he spoke Polish, and one of the conversations was that he was on the phone with Pope John Paul, and giving him guidance and directions as what to do in regards to the church, in regards to what he should do in church Jewish relationships to bring things to more closer, amicable situation. But none of this was to be told to the Hasidim, the closest Hasidim to him, the Krinskys, and the others who were always around him. He told the doctor to speak in a language that none of them knew, that only them two would know. After I finished speaking with this doctor, I was left so impressed by the fact that was a leader that was leading so many hundreds of thousands of rabbis of the movement, who was not divine. He was a human being with Torah knowledge. And what they have made him to be was more grandeur than life itself. Yes, in death you become almost like a saint, if not divine. But the reality is, he was neither the Messiah, he was not God in the flesh, he was a simple Jew who decided to serve other Jews with a Hasidic concept that brought him and catapulted him to the level that he was. And for that, yes, I have to respect the man for what he did. But for what the movement has become, it has left God-centeredness approach and has now become man-centered approach. It has become from a service to Hashem HaKodesh Baruch Hu to a service to a man who has passed away. And as King Solomon says, that those who pass from this life no longer have anything to do with this life. They ask me, well, how come these letters, they throw these letters to the kever and miracles happen? And my best response to those people is the same thing when a Catholic believer prays to the Virgin Mary and puts little notes at the foot of the statue, and their prayers are answered. My friend, belief, faith in whatever is a very powerful instrument. Yes, this is why there are so many similarities between Chabad and Christianity. Between Christianity, which the Rambam called Avodah Zarah, and Chabad Chassidim, which is at least heresy. And I would even dare say that they're now entering into idolatry, because every time there's a picture, they'll look at the picture, and as they dive into Hashem, they're saying, this is my Hashem. Not true? There's going to be some videos coming out that you will see of children who have been exposed to such ideologies, even in local schools, Chabad schools, who teach them that by praying to the Rebbe, you connect to God. My friends, that's idolatry. And if you're a Jew watching this video right now, and you have your child enrolled in one of these schools, I would encourage you to do everything in your power to withdraw them. Even if you get free tuition. Even if you get free tuition, pull the child out. He is in spiritual danger. Because they're feeding him or her during the whole school period these ideologies, these doctrines, that for that sake you might as well put them into a Christian church, God forbid. You might as well indoctrinate them. Because, my friends, there is no difference. There is no difference. When they tell you the Tzaddik of our generation, they're referring to one man, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And my friend, I have nothing to pick with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as I said in many of my videos. He has his merit, and my mouth must be quiet. I am not an Ovadia Yosef or a Shach who calls him the crazy man of 770. And keep in mind, they even said worse things. But I'm not even at that level to be able to even dare say that. But what I do know, that is what I'm sharing. And that's the scandal. Like it says in the book, the scandal of the Orthodox indifference is that the Orthodox should have basically raised a higher cry, and they didn't. My only lament to Rabbi Berger is that the whole RCA did not basically excommunicate or made a declaration so strong as to cut them off. perhaps that would have been a very strong warning. Meanwhile, they continue to grow in one of the most strongest contingencies of Jewish mysticism, which happens to be the Sephardic community. And this is why their eyes have opened to a new venue of new Sephardim that comes from the Anusim, those Jews that were forced to accept Christianity, and now they say, what an opportunity to bring the Jewish sparks back. The Anusims, those of Sephardic descendants. My friends, open your eyes. See what's really happening. They do not belong to Chabad. And to those Sephardic rabbis, what are you doing? What are you doing to help? This is why your communities are dwindling and they're leaving to Chabad. This is the reason. It dwindles and the community is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And you feel hopeless instead of saying, you know what, we are going to do something to counteract that, because there are a lot of Jews of Sephardic background that we need to help bring back. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. We're working in Mexico. We're working in Brazil. Our videos are being seen worldwide. And we're talking about well over 200,000 to 300,000 people are seeing my videos in Spanish. And this is having an effect. But I'm just one person. I'm just one person. How many out there Sephardic rabbis who are much better equipped than I, with much more knowledge, and yet you don't lift a finger to help someone come back? You will have to give an accounting. This is what we're all doing today, counting the Omer. I remember I said one time, and I'm going to say even the name of the place I went, and the rabbi I spoke to, when the when the Sephardic Federation came to Bnei Sephardim in Fort Lauderdale, in Rabbi Ben Hamul Shul, and I raised my voice and I said, why don't the community organize to do something? Within 10 years, the Sephardic community will lose easily between 10 to 20 communities if you do not do something and get into outreaching. Then I hear the squabbles of such rabbis like Rabbi Suissa, the big Chacham of North Miami Beach, who loses his Bet Knesset to Chabad because they put a Chabad house near his Bet Knesset and began inviting all of his people in. This is what Chabad does. Or they'll set up something close to Young Israel to be able to introduce Chassidut. And keep in mind, as far as I'm concerned, after what I've learned, it's MAAMRIM Menut. So you have complete invasion of this throughout all of the Jewish world, and the Orthodox are completely indifferent. By the time you realize it, the whole entire body of Jewry will be so infected by it that it will be like leprosy. My friend, it's really up to you. You can criticize me, you can attack me, just like Rabbi Berger was attacked, and was attacked fiercely. But that's still not going to change one iota of the problem until you make a decision to begin to make a change on the politics and the philosophy that you're going to embrace for your community. Many Sephardic rabbis do not count someone who's Chabad in their minyan. Let me say that again. Many Sephardic rabbis do not count in their minyan someone who happens to be Chabadnik or Chassidic. The reason for this is clear, because of the embracing of what's considered menut. They're looked at as if they were Christians. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with all Chassidims, but specifically Chabad, which has been publicly there at the light. And so jewelry today has obtained what it didn't obtain in the past. And that's a new form of Christianity called Schneersianity. Welcome to the new age of Jewish Schneersianity. Shalom, shalom. We will continue these thoughts and the ideas of Rabbi Berger and the responses to that as we look at how now the Tzaddik will make a reappearance or a second coming from among the dead, which contradicts what our sources say. My friend, with all due respect, the Rebbe was a great man. He was a tzaddik in the traditional term and understanding, but he is not the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation. In history, he will have passed as a could have been, would have been, should have been. A man that did many things for the sake of the Jewish people. A place in Jewish history. But he is not the Mashiach. And we're going to look at next video why Yehi Adonenu Rabbeinu Morenu Melech HaMashiach has become a term to implicate the Lubavitcher Rebbe as Mashiach, and why that term should not, or that expression should not be used in the Bet Knesset in a kippah around the head. The more that happens, the more the true Mashiach will delay. As it says in Daniel, the rebels of my people would attempt to try to force the vision, and they will fail. My friends, they will grow, but they will fail. Shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom.